Just a preview of great things to come. In the KJV, there's a verse in Malachi 3:2. It says that God is like a refiner's fire and like launderer's soap. Launderer's soap. Bleach. Clean it through and through. Yes. You know, Mike Bickle is a pervert. And I don't ever want to imitate him in any aspect of my life. He's a pervert. Okay? Pervert. And people like that should not be in the pulpit. They should go and get counseling and work an honest job. And it's not self-righteous to hate sexual sin. It's biblical. Because if we grow in our hatred of sexual sin, we protect our families and we protect ourselves from damnation. The Bible says that you have loved righteousness and hated iniquity. So you should hate sexual sin as much as God hates it. He hates it with an extreme hate. He calls it abomination. Now, preaching against sexual sin is tough. If you've been following me this year, I've recorded everything from 400-year-old to 500-year-old sermons up to modern times against sexual sin. It's not easy. Finding the words for it to where it could actually come into a church sanctuary, not easy. Not easy. Because these words are so naughty. They're naughty words. And some of them are considered cuss words, so it's tough. How do you preach PG-13 sermons against sexual sin in an X-rated world? To where people feel like the javelin of Phineas has been thrust through the guts of the fornicators, and they feel as if they could never fornicate again. Well, I'm still working on that. Romans 7:13 KJV says, "Was then that which is good made death unto me? God forbid. But sin, that it might appear sin, working death in me by that which is good, that sin by the commandment might become exceeding sinful." What does that mean? That means that when a preacher gets to preaching against sexual sin, he should impart the sense that this commandment is giving you the sense that fornication is exceeding sinful. It is really, really, really bad, and you should like the idea of hating fornication, because you grow in your hunger and thirst for righteousness when you do that. So, but how does the preacher go about this? I'm still working on it. Since it's right around Valentine's Day, my wife and I plan to do a podcast really soon on which words are appropriate to use in sermons against sexual sin. This is kind of tricky. The recent Mike Bickle report by the Firefly firm should be seen as a wake-up call to the body of Christ. To wake up! I had a dream about 10 years ago where I was in IHOP. And there were hundreds of people listening to me. That's probably prophetic of this podcast right now. You know what I did? I went up to the IHOP. This was 10, 15 years ago. I was on IHOP. I had a microphone in my hand, and I did. And this is what I said. I said, "Wake up!" Yeah, I dreamed that 15 years ago. And I knew that church needed revival. That's all I knew at the time. Interesting to know. Now we have a podcast called Wake Up and Win. And I also found out that Deborah, who was interviewed by Julie Roys, said that it's called waking up when a person realizes that they've been abused. I didn't know that. To wake up to the need for preaching sermons against sexual sin, to hate that sin, and to love righteousness. David Wilkerson's sermon, Wild Donkeys, is a perfect example of the type of preaching that we need to be having today in our churches. The old fundamentalist belief was that if there was enough strong preaching on sexual sin and preaching on hell, that it would produce personal revival, spiritual deliverance, and transfer to the affection of the listeners a hatred of fornication. So they would fear the reproach, the damnation, the wave of destruction that such a sin causes. It should be highlighted and absolutely preached against as one of the most abominable transgressions, because it's without question the most seductive and destructive influence on the family unit. Let's say a preacher is burdened and he's ready to go, but now what? Watch your mouth, preacher. Slang words don't glorify the Lord. Neither does depicting pornographic scenes into the minds of your hearers. Remember a couple years back when Mark Driscoll did that book on marriage, Real Marriage? He got in trouble. It wasn't long after that he got kicked out of the pulpit. What was the problem there? He used slang words and he depicted pornographic scenes in his book. That's the problem. That's not the objective of preaching against sexual sin. The objective, the preacher's job in this case, is not to preach erotic sermons, but to make sexual sin appear what it is: a debasing, defiling, disgusting, family-destroying force empowered by the devil himself, a spirit of fornication, mentioned in Hosea. And the more you feed that, the devil will come in and you will be wrapped up in chains. Finding the right words, this is the thing, finding the right words and excluding the wrong words is half the battle. I'll be closely examining Dr. John R. Rice's Adultery and Sex Perversion pamphlet and his Why Preach Against Sin pamphlet to find the right words and try to do this with excellence. But a self-imposed rating system is going to be needed here. Certain words are just not allowed when you're preaching about this. I'm aware of this now, especially WHORE. People are just against that word. It's in the King James Version. Doesn't matter. People are just against that word. So that's something that I have, because the old literature uses that word. People are against that word. They are offended. They'll turn you off if they hear that WHORE word. So I've found out that that's a no-no word. You don't say that word. But, it's a learning process for me. God bless out there. This is John with WesleyGospel.com.